You know how people always say the truth comes out eventually? I used to think that was just something people said to make themselves feel better when they'd been lied to. But for me, the truth came out on a Thursday night in March in the form of a lipstick-smudged wine glass and a text message I was never supposed to see. My name is Naomi Bennett. I'm 34, live in Seattle, and I work in corporate finance. I've been with Helix Capital for almost 10 years. And I used to believe I had everything together: stable relationship, solid career, the corner office on the 17th floor with a view of the Puget Sound. What I didn't know was that the foundation under it all was already cracked. That Thursday, I had stayed late to finalize a presentation. I was pitching a multi-million-dollar sustainability initiative to the board the next day, a project I'd nurtured for over a year. My boss, Greg, hadn't exactly been supportive. He'd kept suggesting I let Oliver, the firm's golden boy, help with the pitch. I didn't want help, I wanted recognition. I wanted the promotion that Greg had dangled in front of me like a carrot for the last 2 years. It was close to midnight when I finally got home. I walked into our apartment, mine and Ryan Sand. Everything looked normal at first. Candles in the living room, his jacket on the back of the chair, soft music playing. Except there were 2 wine glasses on the table, one with a faint plum lipstick mark. I don't wear lipstick. Haven't in years. My heart didn't race. It didn't even beat faster. It just stopped. Like it was listening too. I stepped into the kitchen, trying to convince myself it could be innocent. Maybe his sister dropped by? Maybe. Maybe I was being paranoid. I reached for my phone to text him, then noticed his phone buzzing on the counter. I never check Ryan's phone. Never. But that night, something in me snapped the lock on my self-respect and handed me the key to my own undoing. The screen lit up with a preview. Can't stop thinking about last night. That thing you did with your hands, wow. XOK. I stood there staring at the message. Not shocked, not crying, just quiet. Like when you're underwater and everything feels far away, except the ache in your chest is real. That was the moment I knew. About Ryan. About work. About everything I'd been tolerating. My silence wasn't grace. It was submission. I didn't say anything when he walked in 20 minutes later, hair wet from a shower, smiling like nothing had happened. He kissed my cheek and asked how work was. I told him it was fine. That I needed to rehearse for the pitch tomorrow, that I'd sleep in the guest room so I wouldn't disturb him. He looked at me with those soft, boyish eyes and said, "You're always working so hard, babe. You deserve the world." And in that moment, I realized he had no idea I'd already started packing up the pieces of my trust. People love to ask, "Didn't you see the signs?" And the truth is, yes, I did. I saw them all. I just didn't want them to be true. Ryan and I met 8 years ago at a mutual friend's wedding. He had this casual confidence, a smile that disarmed you, and just enough of a tortured artist vibe to make you believe you could heal him. He was in marketing, creative, charming, always the guy who could own a room without trying. Me? I was the woman with her phone always in hand, running calculations in her head even while dancing. Our worlds weren't exactly the same, but he made me laugh. And more importantly, he made me feel soft. That was rare for someone like me. But the red flags? They were there. They just wore disguises. Like the way he used to joke about me being a robot because I worked too much, or how he'd call my job soul-sucking capitalism but never hesitated to enjoy the vacations my salary paid for. Or how, when I got my first leadership award, he said, "Guess they needed to fill a quota." It stung, but I laughed it off. Because that's what women are trained to dominize, rationalize, smile through the sting. I told myself he was insecure, that he loved me in his own way. That not everyone shows support the same. I was wrong. At work, the signs were more subtle. I was the only woman VP in my division. The boys' club was real golf outings I was never invited to, whiskey nights I only heard about Monday mornings. I worked twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. Greg, my boss, had always been polite, supportive on the surface. But beneath the smiles were landmines. "Let's polish that before it goes to the board," he'd say after reading my strategy deck. Then he'd give it to Oliver to present. One time, I confronted him. I asked why Oliver was always the face of the work I did. Greg didn't even blink. "You're great behind the scenes, Naomi, but you come off a little intense. Boardroom dynamics matter." Intense. That's what they call it when a woman speaks with certainty. There was also the time I got passed over for a project lead in favor of a guy who started 6 months ago. Greg said, "He's got more of that client-facing energy. You understand?" I did. I understood too well. Still, I stayed, because I'd put 10 years of sweat equity into Helix, because I wanted to prove I could make it, because I believed, foolishly, that if I just played the game a little longer, I'd win, and because, truthfully, I didn't think I had any other choice. So I smiled in meetings, laughed at the jokes, and kept bringing my A game to a rigged playing field. Meanwhile, Ryan slipped further away. More late nights, more unexplained client dinners, more disdain in his voice when I talked about my work. The real twist? I still thought we were okay. That we were just in a rough patch. That all couples go through this. Until that wine glass. Until that text. Until I realized I'd ignored my own instincts for so long, I couldn't even recognize my own voice in my head anymore. But I was starting to hear her again. And she was angry. It's strange, looking back, how many little pieces of yourself you can lose without noticing. Like emotional erosion. A slow wearing away of your confidence, your clarity, your voice. By the time I stood in front of the boardroom to present my pitch the morning after I found Ryan's text, I could feel how much of me was missing. I delivered the presentation like a machine, polished, precise, detached. My voice didn't shake, but my hands did. I couldn't stop thinking about the wine glass, the lipstick. The lie I was pretending hadn't already cracked my entire reality. When I wrapped up, Greg clapped with just enough enthusiasm to be performative. The board nodded, said the usual empty words, "Impressive, innovative, we'll review next steps." But Greg pulled me aside afterward. "Naomi," he said with his usual politician's smile, "great job, really, but I've been thinking, for optics, it might be better if Oliver leads the client meetings moving forward. You're still the backbone of this, no one's saying otherwise. But presentation matters. Optics, presentation, the translation. You're good enough to do the work, but not to be the face of it." That was the moment I realized Helix wasn't just slow to promote women, they were comfortable erasing them. I went back to my office, shut the door, and sat in silence. My palms were sweating. My throat ached. I stared at the skyline, a jagged reminder that everything I thought I'd built might not actually belong to me. I thought about the time I gave up a scholarship to Yale for Ryan because he didn't want to do long distance. The weekends I skipped seeing my parents because Greg asked for last-minute reports. The nights I came home and cooked dinner even when I was exhausted just to keep Ryan from calling me cold. I thought about the smiles I faked, the apologies I gave for being ambitious, the way I kept my voice soft in meetings so I wouldn't be too much. And it hit me I hadn't just been taken from. I'd been giving myself away in tiny pieces for years. There was a moment, maybe 10 minutes into that spiral, when I opened my laptop to draft a resignation letter, not to send it just to see how it felt, and it felt like oxygen. I didn't hit send, not yet. But I saved it, titled it, "When I Remember My Worth." That weekend, Ryan was gone again some client retreat in Napa. I didn't ask questions. I didn't care. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I took care of myself. I went for a long run around Green Lake. I bought myself a bottle of wine I didn't have to share. I cleaned out a drawer and tossed the birthday card Ryan gave me 2 months ago, the one with the wrong year written in it. He hadn't even noticed. And I started journaling. Not the cute kind. The raw, ugly, bleed-on-the-page kind. I wrote down every time I'd bitten my tongue at work, every time Ryan made me feel small. Every moment I'd gaslighted myself into thinking I was the problem. I wrote until my wrist cramped. And that night, I opened a new spreadsheet. Not for Helix. For me. I titled it Exit Plan. It had 2 columns, one for personal, one for professional. Under personal, find a new apartment, cancel shared accounts, therapy. Under professional, Update resume. Reach out to old mentors. Research startups. Build something I own. I didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time in years, I had questions that were mine. And that meant something. Monday morning came too fast. I wore a crisp navy suit I hadn't pulled out in over a year, the one I used to wear when I still thought dressing the part meant something. I packed my bag with every tool of the game, laptop, external battery, a printed copy of my pitch even, though Greg had already made it clear I wouldn't be the one presenting it anymore. As I stepped into the Helix lobby, the overhead lighting buzzed like it always did, too bright, too artificial. It reminded me of how everything at that job looked polished on the surface and frayed beneath. I passed by Oliver on my way to the elevator. He didn't even glance up from his phone. He was wearing my pitch on his face like it was his own skin. But something inside me had shifted. I no longer felt like I had to prove I deserved to be there. I knew I did. And that quiet knowing was more powerful than any applause I'd chased for a decade. Still, the office felt smaller, like a space I had already outgrown, but hadn't yet walked away from. At lunch, I sat at my desk eating leftovers while the guys laughed in the conference room. Greg had ordered in Thai for the client prep team, aka everyone but me. I got a text from Emily, one of the only other women in the company who had transferred to marketing last year. Emily, heard about Oliver, unreal, want to get a drink tonight? I stared at the message for a moment before replying. Me, yes. God, yes. That evening, over cocktails at a rooftop bar downtown, Emily let it all out. Greg did the same to me, you know, she said. Remember the wellness initiative I proposed? He passed it off to Mark. Told me I was too emotional in my proposal. I had data, Naomi. I had data. I wasn't surprised, just ashamed I hadn't seen how systemic it was. We should have warned each other, I whispered. She nodded. We're taught to compete with each other, but they're the ones drawing the boundaries. That hit me hard. I went home that night and opened the exit plan file again. This time, I added a new row under professional. Start documenting everything. Because I realized I wasn't just going to leave. I was going to build. I started forwarding emails to a personal archive. Saving project drafts with timestamps. I went through Slack messages and bookmarked every moment Greg undermined me, every time he told me to let Oliver take the lead. And I started reaching out to old classmates, colleagues, even a woman I'd once mentored who now ran her own boutique advisory firm. I didn't say much, just asked for coffee, just opened the door. Meanwhile, Ryan noticed nothing. Or maybe he noticed and didn't care. One night, I asked him casually, "How was Napa?" He paused. "Oh, it was fine, nothing exciting, work." I didn't mention the wine glass, or the text, or the other things I'd found, like the Uber receipt for a ride that started outside our building and ended at a condo downtown. Instead, I smiled and said, "Sounds exhausting. You should rest." Because I was learning that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is not react. It unsettles people who are used to control. In the quiet, I made space for myself. I started sleeping in the guest room more often. I told him it was for focus, for the big project at work. He didn't question it. He was too busy planning another client dinner. But while he was out, I was building my future. A future they'd never see coming. It started with a cracked mirror in the office bathroom. It was a small thing, a vertical fracture running through the top right corner of the glass, like a jagged scar. I don't even know how long it had been there. I just know that on that Tuesday morning, as I washed my hands and looked up, I saw my reflection split down the middle. And I thought, yes, that's how I feel. Split. Between the woman who kept showing up with spreadsheets and perfect posture and the woman quietly undoing the life she no longer wanted. That day, Greg asked me to join a call with one of our oldest clients, someone I'd onboarded personally. I was surprised. It was the first time in months he'd asked for my input in real time. But then I realized, Oliver was out sick, or maybe hungover. Either way, they needed me again only when their safety net failed. I took the call, of course. I smiled. I nailed it. And afterward, Greg popped into my office with that performative warmth I'd grown used to. You're a lifesaver, Naomi. Great job. The client was impressed. I nodded. Good to know. He lingered by the door. We should talk soon. About your goals for Q3. I wanted to laugh, but I just smiled. After he left, I added another line to my exit plan. Never let them mistake your labor for loyalty. That evening, I opened my email and saw something unexpected: an invitation. A prestigious Women in Finance panel was happening in 2 months, and one of the organizers wanted me to speak. It wasn't through Helix. It came from a mentor I'd reconnected with 2 weeks earlier. She said, "I've always thought your voice was missing in these rooms. Come fill the space." I stared at the email for a long time. Not because I was unsure, but because I realized something. This was the first invitation that didn't feel conditional. It wasn't about optics, it was about me. I clicked accept. Then I opened a blank document and began outlining a speech. Meanwhile, at home, Ryan had grown strangely attentive. He'd started asking how my day was, bringing home takeout, even suggesting a weekend away, just the two of us. Classic tactic. Guilt disguised as romance. One night, I found him staring at my laptop screen. "What's this exit plan file?" he asked, voice too casual. My pulse spiked, but only for a moment. "It's a project tracker," I lied smoothly. "Internal stuff. Boring." He nodded slowly. "You've been distant lately." "I've been focused." "You don't talk to me anymore." I turned to face him. "When's the last time you actually listened?" He didn't answer. Later that night, I moved the file to an encrypted cloud folder. I wasn't taking chances. Not now. Because things were starting to shift. Greg announced a leadership reshuffle that Friday. Oliver was getting a formal title, Senior Strategy Officer. My name wasn't mentioned, not once. Afterward, Greg caught me in the hallway and said, "This doesn't change anything. You're still key to the team. Titles come with time." I looked him in the eye and said, "You're right. They do." And then I walked away, already picturing the silence he'd hear when I was gone. The cracks weren't just showing anymore, they were widening, and for once, I wasn't afraid of what would break next. Because I was ready to build something stronger. The day the curtain fell wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even particularly memorable to anyone but me. It was a Thursday. I just finished leading a quiet review session with the junior analysts, something I did every month, unpaid, unrecognized. I liked those meetings. They reminded me why I started in finance, not for the hierarchy but for the puzzle solving, the challenge, the clarity numbers could bring when people refused to. When I got back to my desk, my phone was buzzing. 3 missed calls from a name I didn't recognize, Cara L. I opened the voicemail. My blood turned to ice. "Hi, Naomi. This is Kara Lawrence. I work with Ryan at Fletcher Co. I don't mean to overstep, but I think you deserve to know. Ryan and I were involved. He told me you two had separated months ago, but I just found out you're still living together. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Please call me if you want to talk." My stomach dropped. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just sat still, letting the truth settle like sediment. He hadn't even lied well, just consistently. I texted Kara, "Thank you. I appreciate your honesty. I'm okay." Then I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the sound. It was overcast, the water gray and flat like the inside of a sealed envelope. And then I made a decision. I packed up my bag. I walked into Greg's office without knocking. He looked up, startled. "Naomi?" "I won't be at Monday's meeting," I said. "Why?" "Because I won't be here." He blinked. "Excuse me?" I placed a sealed envelope on his desk. "My resignation, effective immediately." He stammered. "But we're in the middle of Q2 strategy." "You should have thought about that when you promoted Oliver with my work." "This isn't professional, Naomi." "No," I said quietly. "It's personal. That's what it's always been for you." I turned and walked away. No dramatic exits, no slamming doors, just the sound of my heels against the tile. At home, Ryan was in the kitchen pretending to cook. I walked in, set my keys on the counter, and said, "I heard from Kara." He froze. Spatula midair. I took off my engagement ring and set it on the table. "No yelling?" he asked weakly. "No," I said. "I'm done giving you that power." He opened his mouth to argue, but I was already walking to the bedroom. I zipped up the suitcase I'd packed a week ago and walked out. No theatrics, just truth. By nightfall, I was on the guest bed at Emily's apartment, glass of wine in hand, laptop open. I pulled up the draft of my speech for the panel, and I wrote the final line. They underestimated me because I stayed quiet. They forgot. Silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's preparation. The curtain had fallen. But my story was just beginning. There's a moment after everything ends when silence feels unbearable, not because it hurts, but because you realize how much you've drowned in noise just to survive. The day after I left Ryan and Helix, I woke up to soft morning light instead of a blaring alarm. No client emails, no Greg, no calendar full of someone else's priorities. Just me, breathing in a quiet room with white curtains dancing in the window. And for a moment, I panicked. Because for the first time in a decade, I wasn't needed by anyone. But then came the next breath, and it felt free. Emily left a note by the coffee machine. "Rooting for you. The spare key's yours as long as you need it." I smiled, made coffee, and sat down at her kitchen table with my laptop. I reopened my exit plan and added a new tab, What I Want. I didn't fill it with goals, not yet. I just wrote words. Peace. Integrity. Ownership. Creation. Voice. That week, I slept more than I had in months. I started journaling again, not out of crisis, but out of clarity. I went for long walks without headphones. I even cried alone, in the middle of the park because I finally could. And then the panel day came. It was held in a modern glass building downtown, the kind with open staircases and endless succulents. I wore a white blouse and navy trousers, no blazers, no armor, just me. The room was packed. Industry women, journalists, students. When it was my turn to speak, I walked up to the mic and felt every pair of eyes on me. But I wasn't nervous. I was ready. I used to believe being silent made me strong, I said, that holding it all in meant I was being mature, professional, composed. But silence isn't always noble. Sometimes it's how we disappear. I talked about being overlooked, undervalued, lied to. I didn't name names, but I didn't need to. Because every woman in that room had felt it. Afterward, they lined up to speak with me. One whispered, "That was my story too." Another said, "Thank you for saying what I've never had the words for." I walked out of that building 2 inches taller. That night, I got a call from one of the panel organizers. She was starting a women-led investment firm and she wanted me to consult on the launch. She said, "You have a voice we need." I said yes. Not because I needed the work, but because I was finally choosing it. Quietly, I started rebuilding. Consulting, writing, reconnecting. Not loud, not fast, but with purpose. And in the quiet, I found my power again. There's something sacred about not broadcasting your healing, about growing in the dark, quietly, where no one can interrupt it or shrink it down. The consulting project with the women-led firm turned into something bigger. They asked me to stay on, part-time at first. Then came a proposal, a co-founding opportunity on a new fund focused on ethical tech and sustainability, 2 areas I'd specialized in back at Helix, though no one had ever acknowledged it. I said yes, not because I needed the title, but because I believed in the mission. And this time, it wasn't about proving myself. It was about building something I believed in. While my old colleagues were fighting for credit on stale initiatives, I was on Zoom calls with trailblazers, female founders, data scientists, impact investors. We weren't just talking about numbers. We were talking about legacy. Meanwhile, Ryan texted, "Can we talk?" I didn't reply. A week later, "You were right about everything. I messed up." Still no reply. Eventually, he emailed me a long apology, said he was in therapy, Said he hoped I'd find it in my heart to forgive him. I didn't delete it, but I didn't respond either. Forgiveness wasn't the point. Freedom was. I saw a photo on LinkedIn Oliver on stage at some industry awards. Greg was there too. Same suits, same smiles, same game. And for the first time, I felt nothing. No jealousy. No bitterness. Just distance. That wasn't my world anymore. My world now included quiet mornings drafting strategy decks in sweatpants, client calls that ended with, "I trust your instincts," team brainstorms that felt like sisterhood, not survival. I started posting again, small things at first, articles I loved, reflections on leadership. One post went viral, women messaged me from all over the country. I didn't know we were allowed to say this out loud. And I thought, we are. We always were. We just forgot. One afternoon, I visited my old neighborhood. I passed the apartment Ryan and I used to share. I half expected to feel a ghost version of myself there, standing in the window, waiting. But she was gone, because I had outgrown the silence that once protected me, and I had replaced it with something stronger, truth. It happened on a panel, 2 months after I signed the co-founder contract. I was speaking at a leadership summit in San Francisco, nothing flashy, just a room full of thinkers, operators, and changemakers. My session was titled "Resilience Isn't a Buzzword." I'd prepared my notes, rehearsed twice, but when I stood up and looked at the room, I didn't reach for my script. I reached for truth. I spent a decade building someone else's empire, I began. Working late, staying quiet, ignoring red flags. I thought I was being smart, strategic, professional, but I wasn't. I was surviving, and survival is not the same as success. I spoke about being dismissed, manipulated, cheated on, not just by a partner, but by a culture that told me endurance was enough. And then I said something I hadn't planned to. I left my job and my relationship on the same day. People told me I was brave, but it wasn't bravery, it was clarity. The moment I realized nothing changes until you decide to stop disappearing. There was a silence afterward, the kind that's full, not empty. And then came the applause. But more importantly, after the talk, came the women. Lining up, crying, saying thank you, sharing stories they'd never told anyone. One woman pressed a small business card into my palm and whispered, "You just helped me walk away." That night, I sat on the hotel bed with the city lights flickering below me and realized this was what power sounded like. Not noise, not domination, but impact. Real, rippling, grounded impact. The next morning, I got an email. A journalist from a major publication had been in the audience. She wanted to feature my story. The version of me that once lived for validation hesitated. But the woman I'd become replied, "Let's talk." I didn't want revenge, I didn't want applause. I wanted a megaphone not for my pain, but for my voice. Because sometimes, truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs a place to stand. I stood outside the publishing house in Manhattan, heart steady, chin high. The journalist's article had gone live 2 weeks ago. From silence to strategy. How Naomi Bennett walked away from power and built her own. The piece had gone viral. Not for the scandal, there were no names named. Not for the drama, there was none. But because the story was familiar to too many women. Too many people who'd stayed too long, given too much, spoken too little. Today, I was signing with a publisher. A book deal. A full manuscript on resilience, reinvention, and reclaiming your voice. I was nervous, not because I feared the spotlight, but because I wanted to do it justice. Not just for me, for every woman who'd ever whispered her story into the dark, wondering if anyone else would understand. The meeting went quickly. Contracts signed. Champagne poured. Flashes clicked. Afterward, I walked through Central Park alone. I thought of Ryan, of Greg, of Oliver, but only briefly, like distant landmarks in a city I no longer lived in. What mattered more were the women I now worked with, the young analysts I mentored, the mothers and daughters who'd messaged me after that summit. Women who no longer believed that silence was survival. As I watched the sun slip low behind the skyline, I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app. The last line of the book had come to me, clear as glass. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it rises quietly in the space we finally claim as ours. I typed it, saved it, and smiled. Because I hadn't just broken the silence. I'd rewritten the story. And this time, I was the author.